oppressed with the dread of living forever. That is the only disadvantage of vegetarianism. So said George Bernard Shaw, who lived between 1856 and 1950. Hi, I'm Charles. I'm a psychiatrist who has a special interest in diets that are good for your heart, help prevent heart disease, and the same kind of diets also can help our endangered planet.
Hi, and I am Sinead Dardo Flynn. I am a student of public health with the Bachelor of Medical Science behind me, and I'm very interested in planetary health and diets that can help the planet but also help people in their lives as well. So in this episode, we're going to continue on from last week and talk about the two doctors who pioneered low-fat plant-based therapy for heart and also cardiovascular problems. We're going to start off by continuing with the research and writing of Dr. Dean Ornish, who we mentioned in the last episode. He gave dietary advice to Bill Clinton, together with Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn, and President Clinton credited these doctors for his recovery from heart disease. Also, how these doctors develop dietary plans that can even reduce heart disease that is already present. But first, Charles, we probably should give a brief recap about the diets that we're recommending. So we discussed these diets fully in the first 3 episodes. So if you want a little bit more information on that, definitely look at the first 3 episodes. So basically, who are these dietary options intended for, Charles?
Usually, these options are really for everyone who wants to keep their heart healthy and prevent heart disease from starting. And new research has shown that the earlier you start having a healthy diet and looking after your heart, the better, because a recent study, we mentioned it last time, showed that young people between aged 18 and 30 who went on similar plant-based diets and were followed up for 30 years, they actually had a 52% less chance of having any heart or cardiovascular problems at the end of that time.
Better get my friends to listen so they'll benefit from it.
Yeah. So, and that's the problem. We get used to very unhealthy diets at a young age. We don't feel we don't have to worry at that stage, but it can catch up with you later. So, as I said, it's never too young to start. And as we said before, these diets are also for people who may have relatively minor problems like raised cholesterol or slightly raised blood pressure or being overweight. Then they'd like to help these problems through a diet and exercise. And then the third group it can help are for actually people who've already been diagnosed with a heart or cardiovascular problem and who may be on treatment, but they wish to help their treatment and give themselves maximum chance to recover by adding diet and exercise in, so that it won't get any worse and hopefully can also reduce the problems.
Fantastic.
And as we said before, if you're on any treatment for these disorders, heart problems of any kind, please don't stop the treatment and think you can abandon it by going on a diet. There's serious conditions. So if you suffer from any heart or medical disorders, please consult with your doctor before going on these dietary options and any exercise that we may suggest, and make sure that he or she is happy with it.
Hear, hear.
And normally, the dietary options we're suggesting will be complementary to a medical treatment. They'll only help it. And if you find you're benefiting from one of these diets and exercise, then it may be possible to go back to your doctor and discuss it with him or her and say, explain the improvement. And it may be possible to reduce some of your medicine at that stage, for example, if your cholesterol level or your blood pressure goes down. And the environment is the other part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Such an important topical thing at the moment, the environment. So what about it? What about helping the environment? Is there anything that these diets have that can help the planet or help reduce the climate change?
Yes, Sinead, these are, as you know, this is a subject that's close to our hearts. As we mentioned, we're both in a group called Irish Doctors for the Environment. And these diets can help with climate change because globally, 20% of greenhouse gases actually come from animal agriculture or the meat industry. And that's more than the entire global transport sector. So all of the trucks, cars, trains and planes in the world produce less greenhouse gases than are produced by the meat industry.
It's hard when you put it into the perspective like that of like comparing it to transport, because everybody probably assumes that it's the transport sector really that's causing a bigger issue, but actually no, it's not.
No,
Yeah.
and we put so much time and energy into reducing carbon emissions from the transport sector, but in comparison, people really aren't encouraged to alter their diet, which would make an enormous difference in terms of reducing greenhouse gases. So, and then the other amazing statistic that we mentioned before is that the production of 1 gram of beef causes the release of 250 times the amount of greenhouse gases than the production of 1 gram of protein from legumes, for example, tofu. So this is something that everyone can do in their lives. By eating less meat or going vegetarian, you can make a significant contribution to reduce climate change. And I think that's quite empowering for individuals.
Absolutely, yeah, Charles. Like when I heard this, I started reducing my meat. I actually went vegan for 4 years after I heard how much of an impact it was having on the climate.
Yeah.
So I think it's really empowering to know that you can have such a difference by changing something that's actually quite simple, you know? Now, you don't have to go, if you're at home listening and you don't want to go fully vegan, you don't have to be fully vegan. You can just cut down consumption. Would I be right in saying that, Charles? That cutting down consumption can be enough, yeah.
Yeah, we're going, because as we're going to say shortly, there are options where there's reduced meat and there's options where you can take dairy, a low-fat dairy product. So every little helps, as they say in Tesco. And it's a win-win situation, you know, it's a win for your heart and it's a win for the planet.
Absolutely. So could you remind us what the basics of the diets that we're encouraging on this podcast? You mentioned there the flexitarian, with the vegan and the percent of fats. Could you run us through what they are?
Sure. Well, the first, generally what we're aiming for is we're aiming for a diet with lots of whole grains in it. So that's a whole meal, a whole grain bread, brown rice, whole grain pasta. Not everyone likes whole grain pasta. It's a personal thing. It took me a while to adapt to it, but I love brown rice and I love heavy wholemeal bread. And I occasionally make bread. In fact, wholemeal bread. One of the recipes we're going to give in a future week is traditional Irish soda bread made with a completely whole grain vegan way.
Fantastic.
Yeah. So the other thing that's good for you is starchy vegetables, which is not, people don't recommend them often in other diets, but starchy vegetables are things like potatoes, sweet potatoes, turnips, Swedes, peas, and they're all actually good for you. So some people go on diets, give up potatoes, but we're saying no. Potatoes are complex carbohydrates.
Yeah.
It's only if you cover them in butter or you deep fry them that you turn something that's healthy into something that's unhealthy. That they're complex carbohydrates. They're broken down slowly in your gut. They don't give you a sugar rush because the glucose goes up and down slowly after eating them. And for that reason, you don't tend to put on weight because you feel fuller, faster and for longer.
Great.
So the other general thing about all the options is there's plenty of vegetables and fruit in them, and coloured vegetables are particularly healthy, reds, yellows, greens, because they contain lots of healthy phytochemicals and antioxidants, which help fight against the aging process.
Do you know what I love? Sorry to interject there, Charles. You know what I love? My favourite vegetable, kale.
Oh,
I
really?
think kale is fantastic.
Yeah.
So it's such a good, because you can eat loads of it.
Yeah.
And you're not really, it's not bad for you to eat loads of it, you know.
It's not, I must confess, it's not one I've eaten a lot of, but I must try it. Whenever I eat spinach, I always think of Popeye.
Popeye the Sailor Man, yeah.
I'm surprised you even know of him, but in my youth, they used to encourage kids to eat spinach by this cartoon.
The cartoon,
and Popeye would be in terrible trouble, and then he'd be in danger in the middle of it. He'd take out a can of spinach, knock it back, and then suddenly he'd be a superhero.
Superman again, yeah.
So
coloured vegetables are good.
Yeah, they're all these options are very low in fats and oils.
Okay.
And that's a very important point. They're all low fat, aiming to keep our daily fat intake at 20% or less of daily calorie intake. And just to mention, as we said before, fats and oils are the same thing. One is a liquid form of the other. We avoid them as much as possible in this diet. And that's in contrast to the typical, at present, European American diets, which contain about 40 to 50% of daily calorie intake comes from fats, and many of them are the unhealthy saturated fats.
I'm always astounded by that statistic, but it's just, I suppose you have to just make that extra effort to make sure you're not getting that much fat in your diet.
Yeah, you really have to. It's a fundamental change. You have to start looking out for fat, something you probably didn't even think of before.
Yeah.
And it's not that 40 to 50% of the volume of your food comes from fat. It's the calories. So fats and oils have a lot of calories in them.
Yeah. So briefly, Charles, let's go over the options for diets.
Yeah. So for people who find it hard to give up meat completely, there's the flexitarian option, but it's a reduced meat. So you can eat meat once a day and also have one or more days a week which are completely vegetarian, at least one day a week. And the rationale of eating meat once a day is the more red meat you eat, particularly, the higher your chances of a heart attack and heart problems. So keeping a limit on it is a good idea. The second option is lacto-vegetarian, where you can take dairy, but it all tends to be low-fat dairy. So, for example, we're using skim milk, not even semi-skim, but it has to be skim milk, low-fat or no-fat yogurt. Once a day, you can have some low-fat cheese in it, like a slice of low-fat cheese, which you can put on a pasta, for example. Then there's a vegan option, and that's aimed at keeping fat consumption at or below 20%, as with the other two options. And then finally, there's another vegan option. This aims at a much lower fat limit, keeping fat consumption at 10% or less of daily calories. But this is the hardest option to follow, but it also has the most profound effects, beneficial effects.
Thank you for that summary, Charles. And just if you're listening and you want to know more about the diets, you can listen to the first episode for more information on those diets. So now we're going to take a little break, and when we come back, we're going to be continuing on with the story of Dr. Dean Ornish and his revolutionary work using plant-based diets to prevent and even reverse heart disease. So if you want to take a break, have some tea or coffee, no full-fat milk. It's not allowed. If you're feeling hungry and you want a snack, why not try a healthy one, like a bowl of whole grain cereal or muesli with some low-fat soya milk and sliced bananas and blueberries on top.
If you find what we've been talking about interesting, you'll find a lot more information and details in my book, Save Your Heart, Lose Weight and Help Save the Planet, which is available on Amazon.
So back to Dr. Dean Ornish, we talked a bit about him in the last episode. So we talked about his research on, he did a bit of research in medical school on the effects of diet and exercise on cardiovascular disease. So what happened next for Dean Ornish?
Yeah, so amazingly, as you say, he started in medical school and then he took another year off before his intern year. And he did these kind of preliminary studies. But in those, the subjects of his study stayed, first of all, in a hotel, and then they stayed in a condominium for almost a month. And but he wanted to see if he could do the same things for people who were living out in the community, not in a kind of protected environment.
Yeah.
So in 1984, he moved to San Francisco, and there was another group of doctors. He embarked on a much bigger study and for a longer period of time. So this time the research was over 1 year to see how these dietary changes and other things in the program could help for people living in the community.
Okay.
So they had a lot of difficulty obtaining funding to do this because normally people wanted to fund things associated with drugs or other things, but they managed to get some donations and large foundations supported them. Mm-hmm. And also, by that time, there were new methods of more precisely measuring how the flow of blood in the coronary arteries was in an individual. And these are technical names now, but they were called quantitative coronary angiography. And then there was also PET scans, positive emission tomography. That's a form of MRI, if I remember rightly.
Okay.
And they use radioisotopes to give a more precise measure of the diameter of the lumen of the coronary arteries.
And just for anyone who doesn't know what a lumen is just the center kind of space in the middle of the artery.
In other words, how much blood can get through your artery.
Yeah.
And in the same way as a hot water pipe can start to get blocked with calcium, our coronary arteries and all the arteries in our bodies can slowly get fats and cholesterol, and calcium can accumulate in them. That's called atherosclerosis. And it means that less blood can get through to the heart. So that's what he was studying, and he collected the patients over a 3-year period. He got them for patients who were having angiograms. That the angiograms it's like a brief video of your heart arteries and seeing how they're functioning. So he only took patients who had a shown blockage in either 1, 2, or 3 of their coronary arteries. So that's already quite a kind of serious degree of ischemic heart disease. And then this is the important thing. Unlike the other studies, in a good scientific experimental study, you want to have a control group and an experimental group.
Yeah.
And you don't want to pick who goes into which group, because that would subject them to bias. So you randomly assign them. And there's computer programs that do that into an experimental group who went on his diet and the lifestyle changes that we discussed last time. And that was 28 patients. And then he had another control group of 20 patients who received usual care for a follow-up for cardiac patients.
And just for anybody who wants to know, this is called a randomized controlled trial. So in epidemiology, the randomized controlled trial is the strongest study design for trying to find out causality. So it's a very strong study design. So this is like the gold standard in epidemiology.
That's true, yeah. So they wanted to do it in a very vigorous study method. And so it was quite an undertaking, because it wasn't known at that time if people could sustain these changes in diet and lifestyle over such a long period of time in their own homes. So the two groups, the experimental group, had a program that included a low-fat vegetarian diet, and amongst our dietary plans, they're on the 10% diet, virtually vegan. They had a moderate aerobic exercise program like walking. They had stress management, and they had group support. And if they smoked, they were encouraged to cease smoking. And smoking is something that increases atherosclerosis. So it's something you really want to avoid if you have any heart problems. On the other hand, the control group were asked to follow their doctor's advice. That would be the cardiologist and the family doctor. And they were advised to make moderate dietary changes. That was to eat less red meat, eat more fish and chicken, use margarine instead of butter, and no more than 3 eggs per week. Also to exercise moderately, and as we said, to quit smoking. So this control group, their fat consumption would be around about 30% of their daily total calorie intake.
Okay.
So the diet of the experimental group, of the ones who were on the special diet, it consisted of vegetables, fruits, grains, legumes, and soybean products. There was no restrictions of calories.
Okay.
They couldn't take animal products, except they were allowed egg white, which has a very low fat content.
Okay.
And 1 cup a day, approximately 240 mils of non-fat or skim milk or yogurt. And this aimed at daily fat consumption of 10% of their total daily calories. And about 70 to 75% of their total calorie intake was carbohydrates, but they were, as we've said, they were mainly complex carbohydrates.
The slow
Yes,
release carbohydrates.
whole grain and starchy vegetables. They were on stress management techniques, which included yoga-like exercise of stretching.
Okay.
They had relaxation breathing techniques. They did meditation. They did progressive relaxation and imagery. And they were asked to do these techniques for 1 hour a day. And depending on the capability of their hearts, they were given exercise regimes, which were mainly walking. And they were asked to do this for a minimum of 3 hours a week with a minimum of 30 minutes per session. And they also had twice weekly discussion groups to give them social support and help them stick to the lifestyle changes. Now, they had the patients, or the subjects, I should say, had an initial angiogram at the start of the study to look at how their coronary arteries were functioning, and another one at the end of the study after 1 year.
Okay.
They also had their blood lipids, their cholesterol, etc., checked at the beginning and at the end of the study. And what they found was something totally amazing. That was that the coronary artery blockages had actually reduced in the great majority of patients on Dr. Ornish's lifestyle program. This study was published in the highly prestigious Lancet journal in 1990, and overall they found that 82% of this experimental group who were on the program
82%?
Yes, had reduced the amount of blockage or occlusion in their coronary arteries after 1 year of adhering to the lifestyle changes. And on the other hand, the control group, who had been following medical advice, as the way we said, there was a tendency to worsening of the coronary artery blockages.
That's insane, isn't it?
Yeah. So specifically, the experimental group, the average blockage lessened from 40 to 37.8, but in the control group, the blockage increased on average from 42 to 46.
So have I got this right? They did a randomized control trial. You had one on the 10% along with other interventions, but it was mostly the 10% fat was the biggest difference between the two, as opposed to the 30% fat in the kind of control group.
Yes. Yeah.
And then you had 82% of the experimental group had reductions
of the
blockages.
Yeah.
That's incredible results, isn't it?
And the control group, it actually got worse, slightly worse.
With medical advice, with the standard of care at the time. Yeah.
So this meant that the atherosclerosis within the coronary arteries of the experimental group had actually reduced without drugs, which was quite unprecedented. And when they went on to study, when the blockages initially occupied more than half of the diameter of the artery, when they analysed those alone, they found the results were even more startling, that the blockages reduced by 5.3% in the experimental group, but they increased by 2.7% in the control group. And considering these blockages take years to build up, it was phenomenal that such a reduction had occurred over the course of a year.
Yeah.
And actually some coronary arteries that had been completely blocked actually opened up in the experimental group. Another interesting thing, some of the greatest reduction in blockages occurred in the most severe cases and sometimes the older age groups. And this wasn't expected because they thought that younger people and less severe blockages would have the biggest changes. But in fact, in a way, the worse your prognosis would seem to be, the more the changes were helpful and effective.
Do you know, was that study ever repeated?
Well, he went on to extend it.
Okay.
But there hasn't been, as a general point, that there hasn't been a lot of repeated similar studies. Not on very, like we were talking before on studies with thousands of patients. Yeah. All of the studies in this, for some reason, have been very small groups of patients. So I don't know why that is. The other thing I want to mention, the other big finding that they had from the study was that the cholesterol and blood lipids improved very significantly in the experimental group. So the experimental group had an average reduction of 24% in their total cholesterol level and 37% in their LDL, the bad cholesterol, after a year.
Just insane. Like, crazy results after a year, yeah.
But there was little change in these levels in the control group.
Yeah.
So this showed that lifestyle changes could be successfully adhered to in people living in the community over a long period of time of 1 year, and bring about substantial benefits to their heart and their blood lipids. And they found that this was always a big worry. Could people, because as I've said before, 10% restricting your daily intake of fat to 10% is difficult.
Yeah.
But we've been talking about looking for veggie burgers that have 10 grams and less. We'll go into the number of grams, but it's not an easy thing to do it.
Okay.
So
I think especially with the environments we're in kind of nowadays, that it takes extra effort.
Yeah.
But it definitely sounds like it's worth it from that study anyway.
Absolutely. And as I say, this is the 10% one. The 20% one that we're advocating in 3 of our diets is a lot easier to stick to, and that's
You
the
still
one,
get benefits, yeah.
So, but in the study that he did, the experimental group were very well able to restrict their fat intake to 10%, and in fact, on average, they reduced it 6.8% of daily calories came from fat. And they also adhered well to the exercise and the stress reduction. That's understandable, because exercise, I find it enjoyable every day to go out for a walk.
100%, yeah.
And it's also enjoyable to do maybe a bit of stretching and a bit of meditation. So these were all parts of his regime. And so the other thing is, it struck me, statins are very commonly used and, in lowering cholesterol. So I wondered, could the same results be used just by using cholesterol-lowering drugs, for example, the statins? So Dr. Ornish, this information I got from his book, which is Dr. Dean Ornish's program for reversing heart disease. And he addressed that in this book, and he quoted 2 studies that address this point. And the first study, patients were divided into 2 groups, both adhering to a 30% of daily calorie intake came from fat. But the first group received high doses of 2 cholesterol-lowering drugs, so that they kept their cholesterol below, in the European system, 4.65. In the American, that's 180 milligrams per deciliter. And the second group just had that lower fat. They didn't take the statin drugs. And they were checked with coronary angiograms after 2 years and 4 years. In the group having the 2 cholesterol-lowering drugs, the 2 statins, only 16% showed some measurable reversal of the coronary artery blockages. In 40% of the same group, despite being on the statins, the blockages actually got worse, and there were similar results after 4 years.
And just to clarify, this wasn't a study by Dean Ornish. This was just studies he quoted in his book.
In his book that were done around the time of the study.
That 16% showed measurable reversal, whereas we had the 82% in
his study.
His
Lancet
study. It looks like, from these 2 studies now, there are only 2 studies, but it still looks like that the diet and exercise might be a better option.
Yes. And by the way, the other group, who were just on the 30% low-fat diet but without the cholesterol-lowering drugs, did even worse again, and less than 1% reduction in the coronary artery.
So these people are not on statins?
No, and they're going for a 30% fat reduction diet. Now, however, just saying that, they were aiming at that, but their actual fat consumption may have been more than 30% of total calories, because it's a hard thing to do. And many previous in Dr. Ornish's study, they were very strict about fat reduction, but in many studies, people are just advised to reduce it to around 30%. They often don't actually manage to do that. So Dr. Ornish actually then went on to extend the study because he wanted to see if they could continue with this regime for 5 years in total.
So was this a new study or an extension of the old study?
It's an extension of the old study.
Okay.
And it was published in the Journal of the American Medical Association in 1998. And it was to investigate whether further improvements in heart function and reduction of heart disease would occur over a longer period of time.
Okay.
Still with patients in the community. So he used the same group of patients who were in the Lancet study, and he asked them if they'd be willing to extend the study for a further 4 years. And most of them agreed to do so.
Why would they not?
If they were doing well, absolutely.
Yeah.
So they were able to maintain the same changes in diet and lifestyle over the following 4 years as well.
That's very impressive.
The control group continued with the same moderate changes. And in the lifestyle group, the partial blockage of the coronary arteries was lessened by 4.5% after 1 year, but it went on to be lessened in total by 7.9% after 5 years.
Mad.
In other words, the blood flow to the heart muscle increased.
Yeah.
And in contrast, in the control group, the narrowing of the coronary arteries worsened by 5.4% in 1 year, and it went on to a massive 27.7% worsening after 5 years.
Oh my God.
So also in the lifestyle group, there were less than half the number of cardiac events compared to the control group during the 5-year period. And cardiac events included myocardial infarctions or heart attacks, deaths, cardiac hospitalizations, etc. So this study showed that the dietary and lifestyle changes could be successfully continued in the community over a long period of time, and that these changes continued to improve cardiac functioning to a significant degree over that time.
It kind of makes you hopeful for preventative medicine. Like this is preventative medicine.
Yeah.
So it makes you. It's such outstanding results. It makes you so hopeful for people to improve.
Yes. Yeah. So, but one thing I have to say is I've tried the 10% thing, and I was able to do it.
So it is doable.
Oh yes, doable.
Yeah.
I did it for a month, and after a month, my cholesterol went down to the lowest it ever was, which was 4.5.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I can't tell you what that is in the American system.
Yeah.
But I was delighted, but it was tough. But that's what made me think about differing options, because Dr. Ornish also said that whereas 10% can reverse heart disease, 20% is effective in preventing it and preventing it from getting worse. So that's why I've stuck with a 20% option, that 20% of my daily calories coming from fat, which is, I find, more achievable in the long term. But the fact that it works to such a degree, it holds, as you say, it holds up great hope for the future prevention.
Definitely, yeah. I think it's hopeful is the word. So incredibly interesting stuff. Fair play to Dr. Dean Ornish. Food for thought, huh? We're going to take a break now, and when we come back, we're going to have our recipe of the week. One of my favourite dishes, I must say. I feel like I say that every week, but this is definitely one of my favourite dishes. It's a vegan shepherd's pie. I'm starving, Charles. So I want to hear about this recipe.
Okay, so yes, this week it's a vegan shepherd's pie, and this recipe serves 6 people. So it's a filling meal. It's great for a winter's evening like we have at the moment, or if you're really hungry.
Which I am.
So let's get to it with the ingredients first of all. The ingredients are, now again, I may have gone mad with potatoes, but we're in
I don't think you can
Ireland,
have too much potatoes, yeah.
Yeah, so I've put down 2 kilograms of potatoes, but you can reduce that a bit if you want to. Then 200 grams of meat-free mince, for instance, vegan mince. For example, the one I used was Planted, and it's available in the UK and Ireland. then 2 medium-sized onions, 250 grams of mushrooms, 1 can of pulped tomatoes, 1 can of red kidney beans, which was 240 grams, 1 large courgette or zucchini for our American friends, 250 mils of vegan gravy, 1 dessert spoon of soy sauce, 1 heaped teaspoon of fresh thyme or a level teaspoon of dried thyme, 1 vegetable stock cube, and 5 mils of rapeseed or canola oil, and 3 cloves of garlic. And the total fat for 6 people is 41.3 grams, giving the fat per person at a nice low level at just 6.9 grams. So, but I should say the amount of fat in the dish varies according to the type of vegan mince that you use. Some have more fat in them than others, but the particular type I used, I calculated that value. So this is how we start off. First of all, peel and chop the onions finely. And then in a large non-stick frying pan, place 5 mils of rapeseed or canola oil. And when it's hot, add the onions and start to fry on a medium heat. Wash and slice the courgette and add that to the pan. Wash and slice the mushrooms, also add to the pan, stirring frequently until all are softened and starting to brown. Add the cloves of garlic, which are peeled and sliced finely. Then add the vegan mince and start stirring it. Then add a can of tomatoes, and on top of that add some water until it just covers the top of all the ingredients. Keep stirring, bringing it back to the boil, and then reduce the heat and simmer so that the mixture is just bubbling. Then add the vegetable stock cube. Drain the red kidney beans from the can and add them to the pan. From the can and add them to the frying pan. Then make up 250 mils of vegan gravy. We described that previously, but just follow the manufacturer's instructions. I use Marigold vegan gravy, which I find is very good, and add the gravy to the pan also. Then add a dessert spoon of soy sauce, add the thyme, and cover the pan and leave to simmer, stirring occasionally. So whilst that is simmering, take another large saucepan and 2/3 fill it with water. We're going to do our potatoes in this, mashed potatoes. Add a little salt and bring to the boil. I do everything as I'm going along. Some people like to have everything pre-prepared, but whilst the water is heating, wash and peel the potatoes and slice into quarters or thirds. Try and achieve approximately equal size pieces. Add these to the water and boil until the potatoes are cooked. It usually takes about 20 minutes in boiling water. You check the potatoes with a fork. So if the fork goes into them, still a little bit firm in the middle, don't overcook them or you spoil the taste of the potatoes. And then remove from the heat, drain off the water, and with a masher, mash the potatoes in a saucepan. So next we need to get a very large baking dish. I use a big rectangular one, and then take the contents of the frying pan and pour into the dish, spreading it out to form an equal layer. And then with a large serving spoon, you layer the mashed potatoes over this. Start at one end, placing mashed potato equally on the mixture until the whole top is covered with a thick layer of mashed potato. Then place the baking dish in an oven and cook for 25 minutes at 200 degrees in a regular oven or 180 degrees in a fan oven. By the end of the cooking, there should be a slight brown tinge on the surface of the potato layer.
That is my favourite part. I love the crispy bits at the top.
And cook longer if necessary to achieve this. And then remove from the oven, and when you're serving, keep the potato on top. And so you have 2 layers. You have your mince and gravy, etc. in lower level, your potato on top. Add a little pepper if desired, and the dish can also be served with some additional vegan gravy in a jug if desired. And that's your vegan shepherd's pie.
That's a good one. I'm looking forward to trying that one. Oh, I love shepherd's pie. So as always, for our listeners, we'll be putting our recipes up on social media. And thank you to everyone who has followed us on Instagram, Facebook and LinkedIn so far. So that is Your Heart, Our Planet, Facebook, Instagram and LinkedIn. So also please send us your comments there. Feel free to rate the podcast if you've been listening, and thank you to those who have given us 5 stars so far. And we'll read some of your comments out in future podcasts.
That's right, Sinead. And finally, if you find what we've been talking about interesting, these topics, you'll find much more detailed information in my book, Save Your Heart, Lose Weight and Help Save the Planet, which is available on Amazon as a paperback and on Kindle. So until next week, bye.
And a goodbye from me. Have a great week, everyone.